Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Trainer. I'm the Local History Collection Project Officer with the City of Perth. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the City of Perth Library tonight for the second in our Music in the City panel discussions as part of the Lotterywest Boorloo Heritage Festival. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we gather, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and Aboriginal people from other lands. We celebrate their continuing traditions, living culture, and spiritual connection to Boorloo and the Derbarl Yarragon. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. As I mentioned, my role here at the City is primarily related to our local history collection. But local music history is an area that I've researched and written about for some time. And when I pitched this series of panel discussions as part of the Lotterywest Boorloo Heritage Festival, there was a really great response. So I'd like to acknowledge Lotterywest as the major sponsor of the festival in enabling us to tell these stories and tap into the rich cultural history of Boorloo or Perth. This series is something different for the festival in that we're tackling more recent living history and we're doing it through the lens of music and community. But I think we'll find through this conversation tonight that we'll be drawing on a range of other themes that intersect with everything from fashion to technology to the built environment. So I'm really excited to dive into discussion with our panelists tonight. I was going to provide a little bit of context for you around rock music and pubs. It seems as though there are possibly a few folks here tonight who have experienced rock music in pubs. So I'll skip that. For those who haven't ever done that, rest assured it's a thing that has happened, continues to happen, and we'll talk about it tonight. But I also had one of our panelists who I'll introduce in a second is going to lay the groundwork for us in terms of taking us back to the 1970s culturally. So that makes most of my work redundant for the next section anyway. But I will, however, introduce our panelists tonight. So on the far end, opposite me, Robert Bailey began his musical journey in Perth, performing in a slew of bands from the late 1960s onwards, often performing alongside his sister Wendy. Rob played guitar with the Obelia before switching to bass, play with blues rock outfits rooting in the Aardvarks and Flight, and Perth iteration of the Kalgoorlie-formed band Acid Road. He played with Sydney outfit Natural Gas, could open for the Rolling Stones.
Perth.
Oh, my mistake. Perth outfit Natural Gas.
Yeah.
But play in Sydney.
No?
I don't know where that came from then.
I don't know.
Good thing we've got Robert here to correct his own bio. He played with Perth outfit Natural Gas, who opened for the Rolling Stones, before joining AC/DC in Sydney and touring the country. So that's where Confusion came in. He returned to Perth in the 80s and has been making music ever since. Directly to my right, James Anfuso is a collector and rock music historian who has charted the evolution of the Australian rock music scene over a career span of 5 decades. James was a fan and regular punter at many of Perth's iconic rock venues throughout the 1970s and was closely associated with many performers on city stages. James is also a renowned expert and nationally credited valuer for rock music posters and ephemera, and curates the country's largest and most comprehensive collection of rare and valuable posters relating to both the national and Perth-specific rock scenes of the 1950s and beyond. And we have some fabulous rock music posters that James has kindly provided for us to take a look at, which I'm sure will provide spark off some fantastic conversation. We also have Janie Page, who moved to Perth in the mid-1970s and became enmeshed within the city's music scene immediately. She established her name as a searing lead guitarist in pub rock outfits, Blues Union and Invaders, before moving in a decidedly heavier direction. Janie's virtuosic playing defined the sound of early progressive metal outfit Trilogy and Troy thrash metal band Gypsy, Black and Black Alice. Same band, 2 names. As part of that group, she contributed to the soundtrack for cult Australian exploitation film Sons of Steel. And during her time in London, she also played alongside rock legends Cozy Powell of Black Sabbath and Brian May from Queen. She subsequently performed power metal outfit Black Steel and solo project Dark Universe, and she currently performs with Midnight Angel. So please join me in welcoming our panelists this evening. Well, James, now's your time to shine. And you like to? So James has prepared a short program for us to take us culturally back to the 1970s. So nice to make use of the lectern as well.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see a full house. Now, if you lived in Perth in 1970, you were one of 688,000 people who lived here at the time. The average wage was $81 a week. The average house cost $17,500. Just about everybody drove a Holden or a Felger. Okay, if you wanted to read the news, in the morning you had the West Australian. In the afternoon we had the Daily News. Go to Sunday, we had a choice between the Sunday Times and the Sunday Independent. TV, mind-blowing black and white. 70 with the ABC, Channel 7, Channel 9, or 5 years away from coal. Wanted to listen to the radio. Radio 6KY were number one. They owned the airways, they owned it for a lot of the 60s, they owned it in 1970. If we jump to fast food, what did fast food look like in 1970? Friday night for still fish and chip night. If you want it, you could get a real hamburger. You went to places like Bernie's, Feeders by the Sea, gave you all that. KFC had just landed, unfortunately. Closely followed by Hungry Jack's. Movies, 1970 was great. Academy Award winner, Midnight Cowboy. Also, Witch Cassie and the Sundance Kid. And for all us music lovers, Woodstock. Now, if you wanted to buy records, where do we go? In the city, we went to Oxadia, Musgroves, the record bar at Bones, and a year away still were the innovative 78s and Dadas. We hadn't seen them yet, but they changed everything. Okay, music was also evolving at an enormous rate. 1970, there was some unbelievably groundbreaking albums, including some of which were The Who live at Leeds, Led Zeppelin 3, two of my favourites, Deep Purple in rock, and my favourite, Black Sabbath Paranoid. Not a bad selection. In the late 60s and 70s, in the early 70s, a lot of bands bypassed Perth. We had a real shortage of a suitable venue for rock and roll. All we had was His Majesty's Theatre as the only indoor venue in town. We had the half indoor, half outdoor venue of Betty Park Aquatic Centre. And anyone that went to those, especially the Kinks concert, would know how bad that was. And then we had the real outdoor areas being Subiaco Oval and, to a much lesser extent, Leederville Oval. Okay. And the Wacker, which the Rolling Stones, etc. They're my apologies. My apologies.
Parkerville Amphitheatre.
No, because they didn't do international. We're talking international. So I was part of the first You stick to your job. Okay. So that's all we had. Still, the concert hall was 3 years away. The entertainment centre was still 4 years away. So if we wanted to find out who was playing internationally, how did we find out? How did we find out who was playing a top act on a Friday night? How did we find out the famous Court Hotel? So we had a number of choices. Firstly, there was no posters, which breaks my heart. There was bill posters, no bill posters, little stencil signs all over the city, in every laneway, everywhere. But you couldn't find a rock and roll poster except maybe in a theatre foyer or somewhere. So there's a real shortage of that. So that took out posters. Radio was still key. All you had to do was turn the radio on, have a DJ go. Led Zeppelin are playing Subiaco Oval, 16th of February 1972, Whoppo. Everyone knows, word of mouth spreads really quickly, the concert sells out. That's all it took, a good radio DJ pushing. The other option for local bands was obviously the entertainment pages of the Daily News. So that's how we got there. So what changed that set us on the path to where we are today? What was the big change that changed the face of music and started the trends toward pub rock? And we got our state government to thank for that. So David Brand, who was Premier at the time, and his colleagues passed legislation that changed the drinking age from 21 to 18. Doors that were closed suddenly opened, and social culture was never the same again at that point in time. So that was the catalyst for massive change. So finally, let's just look at some of the things that happened musically in the 70s. So if you just bear with me, because this is a mouthful and I can't remember it all. 70s gave us hard rock, prog rock, glam rock, kraut rock, folk rock, country rock, southern rock, punk rock, reggae, new wave, rap, hip hop, and least we forget, disco. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Rob. Hopefully brings back some,
Then be in the memories
for some folks, and for those of us who weren't there, paints a fantastic picture. I'd like to kick off by asking each of our panelists, what was your first Perth music experience? Jamie, would you like to go first? You landed in Perth in '76, I think you said, from South Australia, and started checking out bands straight away. Do you remember your first one?
I do. By that. Yeah, it even works. Yeah. I guess when I came here, I sort of followed the Whyalla Mafia. But there was a lot of people from Whyalla coming over. A lot of great musicians that are still playing today. And essentially, I just tracked down all those guys like Rob Watson, who was playing in a bunch of bands at the time. So I got Mum and Dad to accompany me to a lot of venues. And if I felt gutsy, I would sneak in, being just a 16-year-old, would sort of sneak in and hope for the best. Got thrown out a few times, but kept coming back for it. But I couldn't believe just how many gigs there were in this city. It was incredible. You'd go through the daily news of an afternoon and there'd be all these billions of ads and they all looked fantastic. And getting out there and seeing the quality of bands that was out there was just unbelievable.
Well, you mentioned that you came from Whyalla in South Australia, and a number of musos had come this way, come west, instead of heading east. Why do you think that was?
I think they saw opportunity here. It was sort of easier to come to WA where the lifestyle was a lot more pleasant than maybe going to Sydney or Melbourne. And, I think we were like lemmings. We just basically followed each other. Like, I know where Rob's gone or where Steve Gard who joined the Jets had gone, so we had a little clique and we all found each other gigs. So that was a big thing for each of us. We all sort of had a symbiotic relationship that helped each other to get into bands. Without those guys from Whyalla, it would have been much harder for me to get a kick, to initially get a good kick.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that sort of sub-community, because I suppose at the time, the Perth scene, heaving as it was, people often talk about Perth being such an isolated city and having a very strong sense of community within its arts or cultural scene. But yet fascinating to hear you say that within that, there was even a smaller group of musos where you had that. Did you find nonetheless that you were able to find community within the Perth scene?
Absolutely. I mean, the Whyalla guys were not everything. I sort of took the local route as well. So I would grab the Sunday Times every Sunday and phone up all the band wants guitarist ads or whatever. They'd usually laugh at me and go, "Here, right, Jerry Page, or who do you think you are?" So I got a lot of hang-ups and things like that, but I just persisted and I ended up in a band, of all things, doing a Rolling Stones tribute called Livewire. They had a gig at the Civic Hotel every Thursday night, and we were not, it was a good little band and it was a great place to just meet people, and we made lots of friends through that, lots of connections. So I'd been playing here for 2 or 3 years before any of the Whyalla guys actually found me a gig.
We can thank Perth for that then.
Absolutely.
Great. James, can I jump to you?
Sure.
What was your first Perth gig?
Yeah, okay. Is that okay? I've got to give you a bit of history, if you don't mind, just a quick history to get to that first gig, because it's not an easy one. I've got an older brother who's in the audience, and we've got an older sister as well. So being the youngest of three, I was influenced musically by them enormously. So it came a time where my sister would come home probably when I was 7 or 8 years old with these little 7-inch round things that if you put them on a thing and you put a needle on it, it played music for you. And I was listening to things like 90 Nervous Breakdown, Painted Black, Under the Boardwalk, Get Off My Cloud. And then I realised that my brother and sister were Rolling Stones fans, and that there was this other side of things that were called Beatles fans, and you could only have to pick one. So that was a bizarre thing. So come 1965, we missed out on the Beatles in 64. 65, I'm 10 years old, and my brother and sister get tickets to go and see the Rolling Stones at the Capitol Theatre. Now, I'm begging as a 10-year-old, all I want to do is go see the Rolling Stones. I grew up with these, listening to these things. I thought I was a DJ playing records all day. I put on music at that age, and no matter what I did, I couldn't talk him into it. And I still hold it against you, Basil, just so you know. So that started it. It was sort of, they went off, and I was miserable little 10-year-old. And I think I kept on harping at my sister to take me to a rock and roll concert. So shortly after that, for those that remember that period in time, there was Bandstand on TV, and they toured, Bandstand artists toured all over Australia. So there was a Bandstand show at the Capitol. The headliner was Nobby Rowe. Second on the bill was Dinah Lee. And I can't tell you the other ones. I can't remember the other ones for the life of me, but they were the only two that meant anything to me at the time. So my sister took me to that. I'm 10 years old, thinking I'm the coolest guy in the world. We go there, we sit 2 rows from the stage. So I'm like, Diana's police right here where you guys are. And I'm thinking this is normal, that you go to a show and you get to sit right in front of the stage. So the first lots of guys come on, and that was cool. And then Dinah Lee came on, sang a couple of songs, and then at the end of one of the songs, she stopped. And she went, "How old are you?" Yeah, especially you. I was like, I'm 10. And she goes, "Oh, wow, you're the youngest person who's ever been to one of my concerts." And I thought this was normal. And I'm thinking, I want to go to more shows so they can talk to me. But so that was my first thing. Normie Rowe came on, was mind blown. Big Normie Rowe fan ever since. Him, and at that stage, I had a fringe. I thought I was little Stevie from the Easy Bees. I was very disillusioned as a young kid. So that was my first experience.
And you learned that not every show involves audience participation.
Unfortunately.
Yes. Robert, can we throw to you? No, you were, it was perhaps a few years earlier than this, I'm guessing?
Well, the first experience that really blew me away was about 1966, late 1966. The Anzac House, which was on, well, I think it's still there, but the original building, they used to have these things on Saturday afternoon, and a band called the Beaten Tracks used to play there. And they were doing Vanilla Fudge and all of this stuff. They were just so far advanced, and psychedelia, and well, they were just a wonderful band. So that was Warren Morgan. Warren Morgan on keys, yeah, and Ace on drums, and Dave Hole on guitar. They were just a wonderful band. And then the next big thing the things that really bent me around and showed me other things were actually out there was a place on called What the Heck, and it was on was it street? Was it Forest Street? Sorry, it was on Wellington Street. Yeah, and there were a series of old Victorian terraces, 3-story terraces, and the guy that had Red Spot, or I think Red Spot Catering, which they used to deal with. Bright Spot, that's the one. There, yeah. He took over the end one and then turned it into this psychedelic paradise, and bands like Current Bun and Synthetic Union, and really black market, really wild, very, very loud, guitars screaming, feedback, the whole deal. And that was really another kind of experience. It came to an end after the Meggering earthquake because they then declared that the buildings weren't safe. So they knocked them down, and we've got a park there instead.
And you'd mentioned to me, Robert, that what the heck, because it had been, as you say, Victorian era apartments, there were numerous sort of rooms.
Yeah.
It had that sort of psychedelic, different experiences in different rooms. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the rooms was painted black and white, but stripes like a zebra through the ceiling, the floor, all the walls, and lit with ultraviolet. So that was like an immersive experience. But there was another room that was painted with blotches of red, blue, and yellow, and on the ceiling they had the sorts of lights that they have on police cars, but a red, blue, and yellow one. And they were all synced so that as the red passed this way, all of the red blotches on the wall would light out, and then the blue ones, and then the yellow ones, that kind of thing. So it was pretty wild. They had mirrors behind the band, and they cut out the part of the first floor so that there was a balcony overlooking the band. Of course, the band would sometimes wear paper cups, cans, and bits and pieces, but it was quite an alternative environment. Nothing like it ever before in Perth, and this was when clubs were actually out there in Perth. You had your West End and whiskey and all those various other straight up clubs that they had.
Well, that was going to be my next question for you. So I'm assuming, that this is the height of the nightclub scene. Was there already a sense that there was a difference between what was happening in the nightclub scene and what was happening elsewhere?
Once again, this was not a licensed premise.
Right.
Okay, so it attracted a lot younger audience than from the clubs which were licensed. And you couldn't get into it because you had to be 21 at that point. And when they brought the drinking age down to 18, well, it's a whole other story, of course.
Well, could we talk about that? Because, from your perspective, Robert, and I guess, James, you mentioned it as well, what did that difference mean? I mean, essentially, we had almost an entire generation. Now it would go to two venues.
Yep.
What did that mean for the live music scene in Perth?
Okay, well, once that happened, and I know I've been playing in bands up until then. So I think it was about 1970 when the drinking age came down. 1970.
It was 1970.
Yeah, and so lots of other alternatives opened up. There used to be what you call plonk shops in almost all of the old suburbs, and Stone Crow, which is now Mojo's, and the Briar Patch, and the Galloping Grape, and all of these places were places where they could sell wine. They couldn't sell beer, but they could sell wine, cider, scrumpy, that kind of thing. And a lot of those places opened up to the younger audience, and bands would go and play in them. And I certainly did, played in lots of those places. And they were great. They were funky, and they were old, and not like the clubs at all.
I've got a few slides to show. We might get started with Rudy and the Art Barts here. And thank you to Gary Peters, who's supplied us with some incredible photography. Gary was shooting bands right through the 70s and 80s. So any venues in particular that you remember playing with Rudy and the Art Barts?
Well, there was another club called, it was Firecrack Benjamin's. Yeah. And that was owned by a guy called John Hopkins. John Hopkins also took over the Leadable Theatre, called it the Nickelodeon, ripped out all the seats, and it became a very larger geese. And but he had Benjamin's, and he also used to look after us. But he was managing a band called Bakery, and there was another band called Barrel House, and really Aardvarks, and there were Train, and there were a whole lot of other Dennis James bands that would play in at Benjamin's. But we were on pretty regular rotation. Every 2 or 3 weeks we'd be in there.
I wonder whether we can also talk about the big ballrooms, because there were some shows. I think our next slide is Yeah, a show at the Embassy Ballroom, which we spoke about last week, which was home of the Coca-Cola Bottlers Hi-Fi Club hops from 1960 onwards, with the early rock and roll being played there. But obviously, we get to sometime later, the music is increasingly heavier. It's significantly different. But the Embassy and the Canterbury Court Ballroom both being used for these shows. Robert or James, either of you got memories of these?
Yeah, I've got fun memories. I think I went to that every week. Yeah, that was probably my that and Sandgrover were probably my two favourite rock venues as a young guy growing up, and that was for a multiple number of reasons. Their ability to have so many great bands on here was just amazing, and Sandgrover said all sorts. But anyway, let's focus on this for now. Yeah, that just felt supremely different to a pub or a club. You had a high stage. It was a proper venue. There was lovely booths on the side from obviously the ballroom dancing days. It was romantic. It was everything. And you could meet girls. That was wonderful. So to me, it was like every night it was on. From memory, it was on a Friday night. We went to every one of them, and yeah, bands like this, lots of Fatty Lumpkins. This is early on, then a bit later on, you saw bands like Moby Dick that morphed into Supernaut and stuff like that. So it was you saw every great band in Perth, and then sort of a little bit later on, for those that remember, it also started hosting these States bands. Cold Chisel played a couple of nights there, later on in the 70s and stuff like that. So it was a bit of both, but you could see everything. And, there wasn't too many places where you could go and like spend a year. Would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and many others. So, so at least a 10 band gig for $1.08. That was pretty damn cool. So yeah.
But if you take inflation into account, I don't know, what is that today?
$345.
Right, yeah, there you go. Exactly. Some others that you supplied us with here. We've got the Much More Ballroom, which was Canterbury Court, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there's Moby Dick.
Yep.
I wonder whether we can also talk about a series of events that took place only a few metres from here at St George's Cathedral. We mentioned bakery already, and the rock masses. Do either of you have any thoughts or recollections of either of it?
Did you go?
I didn't go to the Rob Mass.
I went to every one of those as well.
That's why you're here, James.
Yeah, well, they were great. I think pretty sure when we first started, I was 15. Myself and one of my friends is in the audience as well, Clive. We went to a Catholic boys' school, and we had an art teacher, and saw all of it. And he started a rock mass in the Catholic Church. So it wasn't a band, it was just acoustic guitars and stuff like that. So when this come along, I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And Bakery were a fantastic band. So yeah, we went to every one with Bakery. We only got into one inside, so that was pretty unusual. Most of the time, we're 15-year-old kids, we didn't understand that you had to actually get somewhere early to get in. So we sat outside. It was jam-packed. The numbers I've seen could talk about any between 2,500 and 5,000 people were at every rock mass. It was a huge social event. And even outside, the vibe outside of Malone was just unbelievable. Did anyone go? Was anyone there outside, inside? Yeah, it was such a good feeling. And obviously, Reverend Hazelwood got into a lot of trouble. He got swatted by the priest, by everyone pointing to do those things. But he did good. I'm not sure if anyone actually converted to Anglican, whatever. But a lot of people had a bloody good time there.
Well, that was my next question for those who did attend. Was anyone converted? Right. That seems to be the line that follows that. Because of course this is the time of Jesus Rock, Jesus Christ Superstar wasn't far away, and there was a lot of that sort of in the air at the time. And obviously Dean Hazelwood thought it was a good idea to get the youth in, but evidently it didn't really work out. It's a bit of a fad. We've got one more picture of Bakery performing at the Holies Battle of the Sounds. Now, we talked about Holies last week, and I believe, well, I mentioned that Valentine's, Bon Scott's first band, made it to one of the finals, but I don't think they won, and Bakery didn't actually. Valentine's won.
Sorry, Fraternity won. Apologies, Fraternity.
That's right, yeah. So that was Bon Scott's second band won. I think the year that Bakery had entered, or that it was related musicians in both bands made it to the final, which was in Melbourne.
Rudy and the Outbacks got third in the local one.
Right.
Bakery 1, Barrel House 2, Rudy and the Outbacks 3.
Right. And what year was that?
Oh, look, that would have probably been 70, I think.
Right. Okay.
70 makes sense. Yep.
Well, Jamie, let's go back to you. You arrived a little later in the scene, mid 1970s. I'm assuming that by the time you were going to shows, it was predominantly that you were going to pubs to see bands.
Yeah, it was always bands. That's what I lived to do.
Mm.
Every night of the week, if possible, I would choose to go to a band somewhere.
And it was because you weren't old enough to get into clubs at that stage, so it was pubs. You'd try,
Yeah, I did not care. I just walked in, and if they threw me out, I took my chances. But most times I managed to stay, and I'd be with other people, or I'd get sucker mum and dad into taking this, so that were really good. And they really supported my career. Anyway, so they would follow me to Albert's Tavern and the raffles. Got a bit. Dad would sit there with his head in his hands going, what am I doing here? But, looking at all these things now, all these bands were all, when I first came here, they were all legendary. Everyone spoke of Bakery. All these bands are just incredible to actually see them. And I used to dream of at one stage playing with some of those guys, and I was lucky enough to actually play with some of the guys from Barrel House down the track, and it's amazing as a young kid to be able to see Dave Hole up close. Visitor I used to go and see down at Albert's Tavern. They were fantastic. Everest with John Ryder, John Meyer, and I was just in love with all of that.
And did you played in Invaders?
Yeah, that came quite a bit later.
Sure. Was John Worrell in that band at that time?
Yeah, I'd heard stories of John. He was spoke of in legendary status, obviously, and he was over in the UK. Spent quite a few years over there trying to make it over there. And he made the prodigal return to Perth, and the Invaders was basically formed out of John Pekovitz from Bricks and Roy Daniels, who was short-lived on bass there for a while, and I couldn't believe when I got a phone call from Steve Gard, my Whaler buddy, to come down and have a jam, because they just lost their guitar player, to actually be in the same room as John Worrell. The legendary John Worrell was just unbelievable. I just every night at a gig, you'd look across the stage and look at the brilliant people that you're playing with and thank you, utter stars. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, he was a great singer.
But also, the great thing too was that they were mates with everybody else. So, you become mates by default with Dave Hole or John Meyer or all of these wonderful people, and they had so much wisdom and class and quality to their part. You couldn't not suck it all in and better yourself from it. It's just unbelievable. It's just the perfect apprenticeship in rock and roll.
Well, speaking of John Meyer, we might jump around a little bit because history is never linear. We'll jump back and forth a little bit. But speaking of John Meyer, can you unpack the John Meyer Jamie Page trilogy Everest Saracen timeline a little bit for us?
Yeah, it was a tangled web, but essentially, I met all those guys when I was playing with a band called Blues Union, which was the bass player from Barrel House, and we had the drummer Alan Biggin from Barrel House. We had Pete Daly, who used to be in Hamlet Huff, on drums, which is a fantastic band. And we played a lot of similar gigs with Everest. And I remember Dennis James, bless him, this wonderful guitar player, coming up from borrowing strings from me at the Rockingham Hotel back in the day. And I got on very well with those guys. And me and John just sort of hit it off pretty much straight away as guitar players. He had a lot of respect and vice versa, and he sort of nurtured me a lot. And to be honest, whenever John got sick of a gig, he would go, I know just the guitarist. So it'd be, how do I get out of such and such a band? I call Janice. And yes, and that landed me quite a few good gigs over the years, much later. But in the early days, John Myra, John Ryder were just an incredible story of incredible skills and talents, but it was like fire and water. They hated each other's guts with a passion, but they needed each other. You know, they were fantastic together. And John Meyer walked away from what was Saracen at the time, which was, again, a stunningly brilliant band, a world-class, fantastic band, but he walked away because of that turbulent relationship. And John formed Trilogy with Danny Barnes, Gosford. Bless him, he's now passed away, and Peter Thompson, who was the drummer in Saracen, who's still out there, still rocking somewhere up in Geraldton somewhere. Anyway, John and Danny were not getting on, as John Ryder had a tendency not to get on with people. It was a thing. And I always wanted to play with John. He was like my hero. John Ryder was the one person I always wanted to play with. And I desperately wanted the Trilogy gig, but it didn't pan out, and they got Danny. And I said, knowing John, give it 6 weeks, see what happens. So I went down to the Leadville Stockade and saw them up to 6 weeks. John Ryder comes up, hey, do you want a kick? And so I became like John Meyer's understudy for many, many years, you know, even in the 90s and later, you know. And years later, John and I used to look after all John's students when I used to work at Cosmic. You know, so John would always bring him in to see me, and I'd get them their first little guitar. It had to be a white strap copy, just like John was. And we played loads of gigs together over up till when John passed away. You know, we always had the same equipment. We had the same everything. And it was a very sad day to see him go.
One of the other things that you have mentioned to me, Jamie, is going to see bands because of their repertoire. Now, I'm coming to a point. I wonder if we can sort of broach over the next couple of questions. But the idea that you would go and see a particular band because they were playing, predominantly a particular type of music, and certain bands would have that sound. So if you were into prog, you'd go and see a certain band. Or if you were into, a certain thing, almost in a sense. There was maybe there's a delicate line to walk between what were the cover bands. I mean, essentially the bands were playing covers, but it was the choice of covers. It was the choice of material that you chose that sort of set you apart. Were there particular bands that, well, you mentioned a few bands to me that you used to go and see because of the material that they were playing? Who were some of those?
Well, that's right. I mean, I remember seeing McLeod on Hey Jude on a Saturday morning. And they said, we played at the Genesis. I was a huge Genesis nut. Still am. And so I found out that they were playing at the Boomerang Hotel down in Bentley. And I snuck on down there, snuck in and sat in a quiet little corner waiting for a Genesis song, which never came. And the only thing that did come in were the detectives. They came down and nicely sat down next to me and said, "Oh, I think maybe you better leave." So even if they did play a Genesis song, I never got to see it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of those bands were playing aspirational music that we all loved. And, they didn't want to necessarily play covers, but it was a necessary evil. But, they would try and throw in the odd original where they could. And obviously, those originals, like in Everest's case, they were heavily influenced by Zeppelin and Mountain. Their originals would sound very simpler, but ended up still great, And I think a lot of those cover bands still are underestimated in the influence that they actually had in inspiring what came later. I mean, even the Boys, I remember seeing the Boys early on. They were largely playing AC/DC and Angels, but doing it brilliantly. I mean, they were just stunning, fantastic, incredible band. But they needed to use AC/DC and the Angels as a springboard, as we all did, Every band I ever played and used the covers that they did as a springboard to move into originals. Yeah.
Robert, what was your relationship with covers versus originals as a muso?
Okay, when Rudy and the Aardvarks started, we had there were a bunch of originals, and they gradually diminished, but we used to play them out, and along with free kind of songs and Deep Purple, it was a mix. And once John left and formed Fatty Lumpkin, we went through various stages, but we ended up with a guy called Ron Sleeden, and who leaned more heavily into blues. And so the band got more into the melodic end of blues stuff. So, and he had some original material that we played as well. So that was pretty much it in terms of playing around Perth.
But even bands like Fatty Lumpkin or Vakery, who were writing original stuff, still had to play covers, didn't they?
That's right. That was the biggest thing to want to go to a night of all original material, except maybe other bands who were doing all original material, and their clique or their followers, and there was that scene, but it was very, very small. And trying to find venues that would accommodate it was difficult, to say the least.
Sure, I can remember going to see Fatty Lumpkin in the early days when they were playing venues like the Sangdroper, and their set list in those days was just Rotel, songs of Aqualung, Yes, playing songs like Roundabout and stuff like that, which at that stage nobody in Perth was doing that sort of stuff. And it wasn't commercial on the radio. It was sort of like a little bit indie. So they were covers, but they were like originals, because a lot of people in the audience had never heard them anyway. So they were outstanding musically, etc. So that was the other thing as well. It was that balance between some of those bands that played some of those original tracks that a lot of people didn't recognise. When bands were playing Sensational Alex Harvey, for example, that's pretty cool. Must be original. So it was educational as well.
Well, that's a segue into my next question, which was the distinction between, even though they weren't, these bands weren't necessarily playing all original material, the distinction between going to get a little controversial here, the rock bands and the fruit bands.
It's okay. I played in both.
Right. Okay.
I don't even know what that one is. What's the brand?
Now, fruit bands were sort of like, they did the Mark IV, the Troubadours, and they were very
Cabaret band was, I guess, the other way that they were known. Yeah.
highly polished, with wonderful harmonies and some really great players and all of that sort of stuff. But they'd limit their soloing to what they were actually copying. So, you'd go and see these bands and they perform them as close to the originals as possible. Whereas the rock bands would have a harder edge, far more rockier and a lot more of the rock end. Wouldn't care too much about the harmonies. Bakery were a bit of an exception. They had some great harmony stuff going. But most of the other bands didn't really do that much. They didn't put that much effort into that harmony side. But then when I played in a band called Natural Gas, it was formed by Rex Fullen, who'd been in Bakery and the Troubadours, and his wife, and John Lamin, who'd been in the Mark IV. And we had a drummer called Paul Johnson, and my sister and I, and it was a 5-piece harmony kind of thing, but we were doing stuff like Ekawita's White Trash and stuff that wasn't really getting much in the way of airplay around Perth. They called Cactus, some weird sort of heavier kind of edged stuff. And, it worked for us. We were doing 10 gigs a week.
Yeah, you played a lot of nightclubs. So
We did a around a club 5 nights a week.
So which were the clubs that you were playing?
Waldorf, Lodio's, so I'm trying to think of the names of it. There was one called Pepe Lopez that was over in Northbridge that was owned by Shirley Fair.
that was the old Amazon bank.
It was the church and there was Ricky Tika. It was all these. It's had a million names. I don't know what it's called now. If it's even.
It's still there.
Is it?
Is it still the library? Anyone know?
Oh, the last time.
Last time I saw it was the library.
So and when it was Ricky Tick, it was like a psychedelic emporium. But
I was too young.
Well, I wonder if that distinction was sort of maybe further entrenched. You mentioned, Rob, by the emergence of, I guess, heavier styles and more technically complex musicianship as well. Styles like prog and fusion. Was there a defined line between rock versus pop, between rock bands and fruit bands, or was it a bit more vague and a bit more nebulous, perhaps?
yeah, look, the what you're calling the fruit band scene had been around forever. It was based around bands being inspired by the Beatles and the Hollies and all of those really melodic things, and they were probably more palatable to a larger audience, and hence they got lots and lots of gigs, and they were probably far more businesslike, and most of them, well, the key bands around town were fully professional. And so they were deriving their whole income from doing this. And so, they weren't going to test the edges too strongly, let's put it that way, and put themselves into a position where, a venue owner would go, don't like what you're doing.
That most of those bands, I'm assuming, would have been, booked via agencies. And I'm assuming that agencies may have had a hand in dictating.
Victor James was the big agency around town, which Vic Kalis and Jim Sheridan, I think it was, ran that. And they had a very, very strong hold. There was another major agency, but they called BBC, that worked a lot of country stuff. But that's where their focus was.
Well, let's talk about another aspect of, well, we're talking a lot about local music, but the impact of touring international acts, and I guess the boost that could give to bands. So James, you obviously supplied us with some incredible posters, and we have there's another of those bands there. Thanks to Gary for another great photo. I think the next one I have here, yeah. So I think you've given some posters for great local shows, which you've seen a few of already, but some big international tours as well, which were a pretty important mechanism for exposing large audiences to local bands as support acts here. So, Robert, you, I think, played on this tour, did you?
We did the Perth.
Is it the Waker?
Yeah, we were the opening band. Fatty Lumpkin followed us, and then the
Did you play before the the girl that come out and did all those gymnastics, twirling and
I think she was first, wasn't she?
I cut out.
I was trying to like Seppi Fiddle to his own wrist.
Yes, it was, you know, we were supposed to play in Subiaco before Slade, Status Quo, and Zinua Span. We were
Lindisfarne.
Was it Lindisfarne? Yeah. And we were booked to play. We got there and they said, well, you can set your PA up. I think we said, F you, but we're not. How could we play in front of the Subiaco grandstand with like a 200-watt PA for crying out loud, and they have this concert thing? So we just weren't going to do it. And this was at a time when, and that caused a bit of a ruction in the union, because part of what was going on for touring acts was they had to put on local support. They had to have Australian support acts. I think it's all very different now, but that was at that point in time. So us refusing caused a bit of ripple in the union, all those sorts of things. But yeah, probably well and truly forgotten by now. But the big one was the Stones one, and that was quite amazing. I've never played in front of this big an audience.
It was a horrible hot day.
It was a dreadful hot day, stinking hot.
I don't know whose idea it was to have an afternoon concert. Yes. But that was crazy. Yeah, it was a hot, horrible day. Did you actually get to meet the Stones?
No, but I walked alongside Miff and Keith, who came up to about here on the heats. And they were engaged in a conversation, but we were heading back towards the bringer at Tawa. Yeah, and I didn't hear of it.
Well, James, what's your Rolling Stones story?
Okay. We've got to go back in time again to something different. But if you can recall the last time I was really upset that I missed out on the 65s tour, for the next few years, I'd look through every music magazine, waiting for him to tour again. And then for those who sort of had similar interests, towards probably around 1970, 71, every year you'd pick up Go Set and the Rolling Stones were coming. It was sort of like somebody recycling the same story every year. The Stones are coming, you get all excited, and then Rolling Stones cancelled. Finally get to 73 and they show up, which is great. So we go off to the Wacker. There was a big group of us that went to the Wacker. Horrible hot day. After the show, I'm with one of my friends, Clive, and I've got these fond memories of him in 65. I read everything about the 65 tour in Perth. They stayed at the hotel down on Riverside Drive, something Lodge Pub Company. They stayed there. They went swimming down Waikiki Way. There was pictures of them in the West Australian. There was pictures on the swimming pool and the Daily News front page. And it all revolved around, they hated the breech winters. So they tried to tour in the summer. And with things like, when they came to Australia, they wanted preferably to stay near the beach. So I'm thinking, I'm a 18-year-old kid, and I'm still back in 65 where I get talked to by singers. I'm thinking it's normal to want to go meet these guys. So I say to my mate, let's go see if we can find the Rolling Stones. Now that might sound weird, but it seemed pretty logical at the time. And he's going, oh yeah, well, where could they possibly be? At that stage, you look at, if you remember Perth in 73, there wasn't a lot of hotels anywhere near the beach. We had the Cataccio, but they were sort of a little bit different. And the other one was further down the road. We had the White Sands, so you had the tavern in the front and you had the high rise at the back. So I say to my mate, they've got to be at the White Sands. And he's going, don't be ridiculous. But it had to be the White Sands. But if you remember, anyone go to the Led Zeppelin concert in 72? Yeah, okay. Do you remember they got raided by the Drake Squad?
Downright good. Oh, yes, I'm there.
No one was. Oh. Yeah, okay. It's a hard act to follow that one. So anyway, they stayed at the White Sands as well. So it just seemed like an obvious place that the Rolling Stones might stay. So anyway, we rock up go down Hastings Street, pull up on the side of the road, and we're looking, and there's a big green MTT bus, if you remember those big red buses, and I think they had a cream roof or something from memory, and no limousines, no nothing, and no people. Like the car park's empty. There's not a soul there. There's no journos, there's no girls, there's nothing. But being an avid ghost set reader in those days as well, there's this guy at the front with a moustache and curly hair, and it was Bob Jones, who used to do the security for all those guys around the karate club and stuff like that. So I'm this has got to be the right place. And he's going, he wasn't as enthusiastic as I was. So we're standing there. About 5 minutes later, Big Jana walks out, all by himself, no security, no nothing. And he goes, well, I'm going to talk to him. And I go, oh, cool, Clive. He's going, go. So I go over, thinking it's normal. Go, hi, Mick, how you going? And Bob Jones looks at him, and Mick goes, and so I sat, but must have stood there, no one else around, just Mick and I and Bob in the car park. That's to me for 15 minutes, I reckon. Just talking about the show, and telling him I was a big fan from a young age and spinning records as an 8-year-old and stuff. He was all peaceful in my conversation. But he humoured me. You got to laugh at the fact the guy humors you. So I go, I pulled out, if anyone remember those little notebooks that put that this big, that's maybe 5-6 inches high, a couple inches wide, that lines inside, and that little twirly things up the top, so it goes up. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I had one of those in the glove box of the car, so I pulled that out the thing, and I say, Mick, would you mind signing him for me? He goes, what's your name? And I go, people used to call me Jim in those days, so he goes, to Jim, I love Mick Jagger, and I go, oh, that's really cool. Now, while we're talking, the rest of the bands walked onto this tour bus. I'm saying, no limos, they're on that green MTT bus. And I go, mate, do you reckon you could take my little scrapbooks forest set, bring it onto the bus, and ask the rest of the band to sign me autographs for it? And he looks at me and he goes, nah. And I'm thinking, you pommy bastard. But I'm a nice guy, so I don't say that to him. So then he puts his arm around me, and he goes, come with me. And he walks me onto the bus. And I'm going, that's normal, remember? For me, it's normal, for no one else. So he walks me onto the bus, and he goes, guys, this is Jim. He goes, sign his autograph book. So I get there, I go on the bus, I sit down with Keith Richards for about 5 minutes. I go to Charlie Watts, he's wonderful. Bloody Mick Taylor, who was a wonderful guitarist. The guitarist at that stage, Bill Wyman wasn't there for some reason. I think Bill had gone on because they still had to play their last shows in Sydney. So he was gone. But at that stage, our girl. Yeah, well, yeah, we young girl. At that stage, they were touring with a brass section that played on Exile on Main Street. Yeah, too many of those. So they had Nicky Hopkins on piano, Bobby Keys, and Jimmy Thrice. So they were all there. They were fantastic. I reckon I spent an hour with these guys, and there was no one. There was no tour managers. There was the Stones, the bus driver, and we were holding him up to when to go, and Bob Jones, the security guys. That was it. At the end, they all say bye, 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 and I've still got their autographs. I get off the bus, and I'm thinking it's normal. I go, yeah. Years later, when they toured in '95, you couldn't get within 3 miles of them with the security and things. So, it was a great day. It was a highlight of my life.
And you've been dining out on that story ever since then. It does. Boris. Well, let's talk a little bit about the distinction between. We did sort of mention the difference between the cabaret bands and the rock bands, and some of the differences that were taking place. But I wonder if you talk a little bit about the venues too. So, the distinction between the city and the suburbs, I think, is pretty pronounced in Australian culture. And so I wonder, was there a difference between what was happening in city venues versus what was referred to as the suburban beer barns? I might also, just while we're chatting, just flick through, because I think I have to play catch up a little bit with some of the incredible posters and photos that James has provided to us. I love that Fatty Lopkin one, and obviously mirrored in the t-shirt here. Yep. And that's Sid Rumpo. Actually, James, do you know anything about this Sid Rumpo poster?
I do. The photo was the photo was taken by a Melbourne photographer called Graham Webber. Graham took a lot of the promotional shots over East at this stage. So a number of the stuff that was done at that stage, he also did the cover for their first album. So if you're familiar with that doll, that porcelain doll in the cover of their first album, Graham shot that as well. So wonderful photographer. He's also probably most famous for anyone familiar with the 1976, 77 Lock Up Your Daughters tour poster for AC/DC that they did. That's a crazy demonic photo of Angus Young that was taken at North Altona High School then, 75 from memory. It's probably the next to the Rolling Stones in the world of posters. Just think give some background. The most well-known poster image in the world from Australia is that 73 Rolling Stones one. That was done by an artist called Ian McClawson, who unfortunately has passed away. Him and Graham Webber were best mates. Graham was a photographer, but he also did graphic art as well. So he was quite unusual at the time that he could do two skills where no other graphic artist had that. So I must admit, I never spoke to Graham about the concept of this. He was very generous with his knowledge and time, but that's what it was. They had a whole series of these, not as bizarre as this one, but he did a lot. And he was an unusual photographer because his theory was, unlike most photographers that would sit there and shoot, like Philip Morris that we were discussing earlier on, would shoot hundreds of photos. This guy, like his famous series at North Altona, one of the other ones in that series, anyone seen that Rolling Stones magazine with Bon Scott on the cover? And he's bare-chested, which was unusual with Bon, but he had his jeans half undone, and he was showing off his new tattoos. Anyone seen that cover? Another famous image, but that was taken at that same photo session. He took 5 photos of that session, and that was his theory. If I couldn't do it in one, he shouldn't have had the job. He was quite an unusual photographer. Yeah, that's about all I can tell you, mate.
Well, thanks for giving us a bit of context for that particular image. It's super striking, so I had to include it. But to return to the question that I wanted to ask about the distinction between the suburban beer barns and the city venues. Robert or James, do you have any thoughts there?
I think it's more Jamie's area at this point.
Yep.
Yep, we played all.
And
Funnily enough, for us, we had a long running stint at the city hotel in Perth with Trilogy, which was huge. That was probably our number one gig. And Trilogy used to venture out into the suburbs to the White Sands or the Raffles or some of the Cloverdale, Warwick sort of circuit.
so is this Swan Hotels?
The Swan Hotels, which was the High Wycombe, the Warwick, the Cloverdale, if I remember.
So we're talking sort of at least 10, 15 kilometres at least out of the city centre.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they were really popular. I mean, I remember the Warwick Sunday session being massive, when I played there with the Invaders or Gypsy, we did the same thing, Trilogy. But depending on the band, I mean, interesting that I'm talking about fruit bands versus heavy bands. It's a really interesting subject, and we actually braced up with the Invaders with Focus Promotions with Jimmy Lee and Brian Davison, because we actually had an MO of actually trying to be a fruit band that was heavy.
Yes. So what sort of material did that mean?
Well, that meant playing really god-awful cabaret songs all the way through to Jethro Tull. So John would do his Living in the Past, Aqualine, Jethro Tull thing. Then we might go into something completely opposite, the fruit song to appease the masses. That's how we did it. And as Jimmy Lee used to say, it was a fine line that we used to tread between heavy metal and fruit.
And did it work?
It did.
That's great. For that testament to the fact that you shouldn't necessarily underestimate an audience.
No, absolutely. The irony is that with Trilogy, it was the complete opposite. Fruit was a swear word. And if anyone even suggested we play any fruit, in their words, it would be out. It would be all over. Unless we went to the country, then miraculously, trilogy became a fruit where no one could see us.
Well, can we talk a little bit about the City Hotel, now the Belgian Beer Cafe? I don't know if it's had live music there for some time. But at the time that you were treading the boards there with Trilogy, the punk scene was also sort of there. Now you had a little bit of experience playing another infamous punk haunt, Hernando's Hideaway. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, I was in a band called The Shirts, which was originally, is typical with all the bands I ever played. It was originally a very light university sort of blues band with a very aggressive singer. And they pulled me into it, and we overnight became an aggressive, nasty, horrible rock and roll band. Anyway, we were doing a double header on a particular night where we played the Churchland Teachers College. And they hated us to the point that our singer Rob was sitting on a balcony singing to them outside as they all ran away. And me and the bass player were carting all the gear, and we had to dodge bottles and cans being thrown at the band as we left to go to Hernando's Hideaway, play a punk gig where I think the Rockets were headlining. We got up there and did a normal thing, and within half the song, the pub manager was down the front screaming at us to stop. She said, "You're too loud, you're too noisy." And our singer Rob said, "Well, what do you guys think?" to the punters. They said, no, you're not too loud. Play on. And the pub manager's screaming at us. And Rob said, "Well, what should we do? And if we're not going to play, let's break the place up apart." And the punters promptly jumped on all the tables and started stomping and smashing. And funnily enough, our singer Rob, who I played with years later in Black Alice and Gypsy, went to get our band fee afterwards. And apparently there was a story going around that someone robbed the doorbell. Can only assume it was our singer Rob getting the band's fee after they'd broken the place up. But, for a punk rock venue, it was a bit of a surprise for us. We thought, well, we're not that brash. We're not like a punk band. We're just a normal rock and roll band,
Yeah, interesting. I guess the assumptions that were made about punk based on its politics, and we'll get into that a little bit next week with our panel, which is on punk and indie music in the 80s. I am just going to flick through. There's John performing with Invaders and Saracen. So we're getting to the Jamie Page content now. So there's Baby. Again, and can you tell us the story of supporting Motorhead at the White Sands? So you got an incredible. This is a fantastic poster, but even more impressive is that Marshall stack.
Yep, that gig goes down in history as probably the loudest gig ever in WA rock history. I don't know if there's anyone that was here. I've got Benny Frank might have his yet. But at the sound check, they used the sound of a helicopter to tune the PA. And there was bottles of bourbon falling off the shelves of the pub. And it was just unbelievable. As all that stuff was all plugged in, turned up to 10. Like if you look at my little amp up there was just the one little Marshall. And I just had it cranked through the fallback to get volume out of it. They literally used everything. And it was just absolutely deafening. But they were fantastic. They were just totally brilliant. And Lemmy and Pete, particularly the drummer, were really, really nice to us and really helped us out afterwards. And we had a very long drinking session that Lemmy tried to seduced my partner as she did, as you spirit rock and roll. But it was probably one of the best gigs I've ever played. It was just unbelievable. You know, the vibe in the room. It was all like the City Hotel on steroids.
Yes. Yeah, we do have a little bit of time for audience questions. Before we get there, James, you wanted to just make a point about how the scene sort of shifted and changed, and you supplied you with a couple of points of comparison. So here we have the entertainment pages of the Daily News, January 1971 and January 1973. All of this completely packed with bands, and you can see there's Natural Gas performing at Pinocchio's and many of the other venues of the time. And then if we compare that to 1979, where we're starting to see less and less. I mean, the size of the ads is bigger, so there's less ads, and there's also it's mixed in with stuff to do with cinemas. Now, James, you had a theory as to sort of one of the contributing factors. What was it? Do you remember?
I'm sure I had a theory.
You told me you did. Do you want to talk about it or not?
I'm not sure what theory I had.
It started with D.
D.
Disco.
Ah, disco. Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, obviously, that horrible Bee Gees have got a lot to answer for. For those of us that were around in that pre-disco days, where you could go anywhere and see great rock and rollers, and then as soon as disco hit, so many pubs, clubs, all went to disco, and we lost the rock and roll venues. And I think this shows that that we've lost a lot. And I think there's even ones on here, like it's one of these has got the basement disco. The Floriad had one of the DJs from one of the radio stations running DJ thing on Sundays and stuff. And live music just took a whole big dive. So you had that side of it, which obviously had a really negative effect on the live music scene, and obviously the number of available gigs. And that was nationwide. It wasn't just in Perth. But the other side of it was that if you look at this, there's a number of original bands that are on here is quite amazing. And that was the other side of it, is that you got from you guys exactly from all that negativity comes originality just about everywhere on the thing. So less venues, but more original material, which was quite unusual to say the least. But yeah, that disco was a killer.
Well, I guess, it also proves that there's ebbs and flows in every scene, and and those changes are gonna take place. Trends, fads, styles are gonna come in and out of fashion. I thought we might move to some questions from the audience if anyone has any. Would anyone like to ask our panelists, or even comments, favorite venue of your own, perhaps?
That's great. In terms of how much you earned for a residency and what you take off door sales, I was just interested to know, did you have a full-time job? Is this what you did all the time? Like, how could you sing on?
I never made any money, the bands that were earning the money at the time were the bands that did start doing the big door deals. So, you talk about Pinky Hayes and all those guys, they changed the scene around, whereas Des would give us a fee back in the day, and God only knows how much, the pub made. But Pinky Hayes and all those guys, the Fingerprints, the Jets, all those bands, all of a sudden started doing the door deals, getting 2,000 people at the big barns, and absolutely making a killing. But that was the big change in the scene, like that started happening, that I remember anyway.
Yeah, that went back a little bit early. Yeah, that went back to the late 70s, where there was a company called Dirty Pool Promotions that started on the East Coast. They managed the Angels, Cold Chisel, Ice House. There was somebody else. They were the ones that sat back and said, "This is crazy. We're pulling 2,000, 5,000 people into a venue, and the band's getting a couple grand, and the owner was making an absolute fortune. So they said, we're not doing that anymore. You want our bands, we want the door, or a high percentage of the doors. And that sort of started changing the economics. One of the things that we sort of half discussed, that was one of the reasons that led to the end of pub rock, in my opinion, is that they were so profitable before when they were taking the whole door. Then suddenly the concept of the band getting a cut above what they were getting before cut into their profitability. So suddenly you had the price of real estate was going up, etc. So it started just the option to have put a band on was just pointless. You could make more money selling songs than Latin. So it was part of the destruction of rock.
I mean, to give you an idea,
Shall we, Jan?
we would probably get a fee at the raffles on a Friday night and for about $120 to play to 1,000 people.
We would all pay probably, what, $2-3
When we started doing the door deals, or when bands started doing the door deals, you multiply that by $5 times 2,000, that's what bands all of a sudden started to earn. But as you said, someone was making money, that all of a sudden someone wasn't making money anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Go. I've spoken.
Thank you. Just to your question and the general comment, back in the 80s, we're adopted in a few bands, and it's really sad that most of the rehearsal studios, I think about Sounds HQ in Mount Wally, back in the day, and guys, bands like Swanee Norman and those sorts of bands used to play at that. It used to be crowds. A lot of the studios are gone now. We used to rehearse, and most of the pubs, I just look up there, most of them are flattened. You talk about the Clydale, the Old Melbourne, and these places, they're flattened. But also the management, I still got all our door sheets, and they pay you $700 to play a gig. And up to the manager, which I remain nameless, took the cut, lighting the PA and the whole lot of the door. You're left with nothing. I think this week it was about $45 between 5 years. So we got to count the draw in the end, so that was the month. I just my other comment is we go over Charles a lot. Down the road from, we used to play there, sing play. It's a great gig. It's a great venue. We go to the Rosie as well, which is just down the road. But I fear that with the infill and the land to your point, these things, if we don't support them, they're just going to go. And a generation is not going to know what it's like to go to these great venues and, some of the best nights of my life are out of those places.
Yeah, and the other danger as well, like we saw with the Nookanborough, which was a prime example. The aged care centre opens next door, and all of a sudden a pub that's been there for hundreds of years has to shut down because a few old people are complaining. And we haven't seen much of that in WA, but that killed, in Sydney and Melbourne especially, that really killed the industry. And that's the other thing now. If you look at even the Rosemount, look at the development that's going around the Rosemount. We come into town over there, and you got that whole block.
Fortunately, they're actually saying, look, if you move in, you get put up for the noise, right? So it's up titties.
We've got one more question that we'll go to. I will just say very briefly on that point. Agent of change legislation, which doesn't exist in WA, it does in Victoria, basically states if you move into a designated nightlife area, you can't complain. You can't get a venue closed down. So we have that. And we do have in Western Australia, it only just came into law last year, designated nightlife areas, and Northbridge is the first one. We're hoping that there will be more, and it will essentially, hopefully, protect venues. Sorry, you had a question at the back?
Yes, sure. Yes, sir. What was the role of drugs like LSD, Hopper?
Is anyone game to tackle that one?
Good, I think, yes. Why me?
You look like you've been a junkie, Nick.
Hand on heart, I've never taken LSD. I played with people that were really off the planet and not even known that they were. So, and that was an interesting thing to find out after the event, many years after the event, as a matter of fact. But, it was obviously around. And the only other time that I can recall coming close to any LSD experience was there was a guy that used to come to Rudy and the Aardvark's rehearsals. They're a very odd man. And he's the guy that gave LSD to the guy who thought he might like the hobby with all the bears at the Perth Zoo. Yeah. So, you know, they're the sorts of lessons that I picked up from that whole LSD thing. So it was a no-go.
Do we have any other questions before we wrap up? Oh.
to us this far. Hi, active. I mean, obviously, it's been about pub rock tonight. I just wondered how you define other bands that were playing at that time, like the Aces and Elks and Dave Warner from the suburbs. Did you guys? Because you've talked about rock bands and fruit bands, but to me, those seem to be somewhere different. I just wondered, maybe, James, you might like to respond to that, where they would fit.
Yeah, well,
Because they were very popular.
oh, absolutely. It's, Dave's a good friend. So, you know, Dave Warren from the suburbs were groundbreaking, and with what they were doing, that was just fantastic. So in my head, I just look at them as just another rock band, to be honest with you. All those ones that you did, I put them in the same category as everyone else. I must admit, like, when I was up there, I read all those, you know, pop rock. But, you know, at the end of that, it's rock and roll. So even stuff like, you know, when punk come along, you know, I used to go at a Dave Warner gig, by the way, at Elvis Tavern, for example. I was introduced to James Baker. That's where I first met James, and she's invited me to a Victims gig. And I go along there innocently thinking, oh, here's this sort of end. So same way, even that was just another example. If you ask Dave just, besides the fact he started the first punk band in Perth, but putting that to one side, he's sort of, he's in a rock and roll band, playing what he wants to play, and he wants to play by the original music. So, you know, I just don't see the worth in categorising them as anything else. You know, Jubilant's great bands, all great things, but just to be rock and roll.
And interestingly, if you are able to and are free and willing to come along next week, we will be discussing an event that happened at UWA Guild where Cheap Nasties and Victims, ground zero punk bands, played with and had Dave Warners from the suburbs at the top of the bill. So we've got, you know, rock and roll or rock band playing alongside these punk bands. And yeah, I mean, I guess that the sentiment that it's all rock and roll and perhaps making those distinctions it is perhaps antithetical to a healthy music scene. You know, and it would appear that, well, the bands have may or may not have made any money, but the punters certainly had a good time, regardless. Yes. And perhaps that's a note to finish on. So please join me in thanking our panelists.
So to say it, what I can thank you and thank you,